I'm not here to convince you what happened to me was real. I don't think I could, even if I tried. All I can do is tell you how it began, before the madness really started, before the shadows and the frames moved, before the paintings began to whisper, and before I realized that what we think of as art is just a doorway. And sometimes doors swing open. My name is Heather Lawton. I'm an estate appraiser, not the kind that sells houses, but the kind who walks into homes full of dusty heirlooms, opens drawers that haven't been touched in decades, and catalogs everything. I work with attorneys in probate courts, mostly. When people die without a will or leave a complicated estate, someone like me gets sent in to make sense of the mess. I'm good at it. I've been doing this for 10 years. The job that changed everything came in late October. It was raining that morning. I remember because I had to park my van half a block down the street and walk through a slurry of wet leaves just to get to the front steps. The property was in a town called Fairhaven, Massachusetts. If you know it, you know it's old money, whaling money. The kind of place with cobbled alleys, weather vanes shaped like sea monsters, and houses that look like they were built for ghosts. This house belonged to Dr. Kenneth Langford. You might recognize the name. He was a semi-famous neurologist who wrote several books in the 70s and 80s about altered states of consciousness. There were rumors, too, experiments that went too far, lawsuits, a patient who went missing, or maybe a student. But that's not why I remember his name. I remember it because his house had a wing that no one was allowed to open. The house was massive, brick and black shutters, a looming colonial mansion with ivy climbing up its left side. A marble plaque by the gate read, Langford House, 1872, as if the name itself were part of the town's DNA. The executor who hired me, a young paralegal named Jared, met me at the door. He was pale, nervous-looking, and kept checking over his shoulder. "It's just you?" he asked. "Just me," I said, shaking the rain off my coat. "You want to stay out of the right wing. Doors are locked. Dr. Langford had it sealed off years ago. Said it was full of mold. We're not authorized to disturb it." That should have struck me as odd, but it didn't. You'd be surprised how many rich people seal up parts of their houses. Maybe it's superstition. Maybe it's denial. Maybe it's guilt. I've seen it all. Attics padlocked from the inside. Whole floors wallpapered shut. You get used to it. I nodded. Got it. Just the rest of the house, then. Jared hesitated. "If you hear anything from that wing, just ignore it." I blinked. Hear anything? He smiled in that way people do when they're trying very hard not to look terrified. Old pipes. Creaks. You know, the house was filled with art. That was the first thing I noticed. Oil paintings covered nearly every wall, portraits, landscapes, surreal, impressionist, minimalist, as if Langford had spent the last 20 years of his life filling the rooms with eyes. Some were unsigned. Others had labels, tiny plaques like a museum would have. One read, "The Watcher in the Cornfield, Unknown Artist, 1869. It was grotesque. The figure had no face, only a smear of darkness where features should have been. Another painting showed a man asleep in bed, and behind him, emerging from the closet, a pale woman with two long limbs and a stretched smile that seemed almost joyful. I cataloged them, of course, took photos, recorded dimensions. Some of them looked valuable. Others made me feel itchy, like there were bugs under my skin. There was one painting that I noticed had been hung backward, the canvas turned to face the wall. I made a note to check it later. I assumed it had water damage or something the owner hadn't wanted displayed. By mid-afternoon, I'd made it through the downstairs rooms and was ready to break for lunch. I sat in the kitchen, unwrapped a sandwich, and flipped through the notes I'd taken. That's when I heard it, a soft scrape coming from the right wing. Not like footsteps, not a bang or creak. This was a slow dragging sound, like furniture being pulled across hardwood. Then silence. I froze. Remembering what Jared said, I tried to rationalize it. Old houses groan. Foundations shift. Maybe there was a raccoon in the crawl space. But it didn't feel like that. The silence that followed had weight to it, like a breath being held. I went back to work. The second floor was worse. Every door opened onto a room filled with paintings. Not hung stacked. Hundreds of canvases leaned against walls, some covered in dust sheets, others just exposed to the air. I could smell the oil and mildew. The room at the far end, the one closest to the sealed wing, held only portraits. Every one of them featured the same person. A man in his 30s. Slick back hair, strong jaw, dark suit. Sometimes he was smiling, other times scowling. In one, he was holding a violin. In another, standing behind a window pane, rain streaking the glass. But it was unmistakably the same man. I found no signature, no labels. Just the same face over and over. Then I noticed something else. In each painting, the background changed. Slightly. In one, there were books on a shelf behind him. In another, the pattern on the wallpaper was different. In one, he had a black eye. It was as if the paintings were watching him change. Or watching him break. I took photos, recorded everything. But when I turned to leave, I realized the last painting, the one I hadn't noticed at first, was of a mirror. Not a person, just a mirror. In the reflection, me, or someone who looked like me, staring back. The expression wrong. Too blank. Too aware. I backed out of the room. That night in my hotel, I listened back to one of my voice memos. Sometimes I record my observations out loud. Helps me organize my thoughts. At the end of the recording, after I'd finished speaking, there was a sound. Faint, like a breath. Then a whisper. Don't turn it over. I replayed it a dozen times. There was no one else with me when I made the note. I hadn't said that. I didn't sleep. I returned to the house the next day. Rain again. Same wind through the chimneys. Same musty air. Jared wasn't there. He called in sick, apparently. I had the keys. I went straight to the living room and pulled the backward painting from the wall. What I saw made me drop it. The image was wrong. It was a portrait, yes, but the subject's face had been slashed out. Not with age. Deliberately. Knife marks still visible in the oil. But that wasn't the worst part. The space behind the torn canvas was hollow. Not just canvas. The frame had been modified. There was a small, empty cavity built behind it, just deep enough to fit something inside. There was nothing there now, but something had been. I stood there, staring into the empty hollow, and heard it again. The scrape. From the right wing. And this time a voice. Faint. Wet sounding. As if whispered through a mouth full of mud. Heather. I didn't go back into the house for 3 days after that. I told myself I was just waiting on an update from the law firm. Something official that would allow me to skip the right wing entirely and catalog the rest. But that was a lie. The truth was simpler. I was afraid. I know how ridiculous that sounds. I'm not someone who spooks easily. I crawled through basements full of rats and drug needles. I once found a suicide note in the freezer next to a perfectly preserved birthday cake. But this felt different. There was something in that house, or behind the walls of it, something that whispered my name and knew what paintings I was afraid to look at. On the third day, I forced myself to sit down and review the photos I'd taken. I still had to finish the job. The estate would stall in probate without a completed appraisal. So I thought I'd at least sort my digital files, maybe make a spreadsheet. It didn't take long before I noticed something wrong. In one of the photos, taken in the upstairs hallway, a painting that I never saw during my walkthrough was clearly visible. A small portrait hung above a table near the back of the corridor. It wasn't part of the collection. It wasn't stacked like the others. And I know, without a shadow of a doubt, that I didn't see it with my own eyes. Zooming in made my stomach twist. The subject of the painting was the same man, the one featured again and again in all those strange portraits upstairs. But this time, he was sitting in what looked like the Langford kitchen. The same table, the same tile floor, and the walls behind him were streaked with something that looked like soot or dried blood. There was no signature, only a single word, scrawled at the bottom of the canvas. Still, by the time I arrived at the house again, it was late afternoon. The air smelled damp. The sky was bruised purple, clouds swirling low and fast like something was building overhead. The front door creaked open too easily. I don't remember leaving it unlocked. I moved carefully through the rooms. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt different. The paintings I had cataloged were still in place, but they seemed more vivid now, almost glistening, the shadows in them deeper, the eyes sharper. I made my way upstairs. The photo had shown a painting that didn't exist when I was there last. But now it was there, hung exactly where the photo had captured it. The man's eyes followed me as I stepped closer. The background was the kitchen, and behind him in the painting, just barely visible in the lower right-hand corner, was a shape. A pale face peering in from behind the doorframe. Too long, too low, like someone crawling. A cold rush passed through my body. I turned, half expecting to see someone behind me. There was no one. When I got back to my car, I found 2 missed calls from Jared, the paralegal. One was just a hang-up. The second left a voicemail. He sounded panicked. "Heather, listen, I don't think you should be in that house anymore." I was going through some of Langford's old notes, stuff from the 70s, and it's bad. He was experimenting with sensory entrapment, art that could hold thoughts. He believed certain images could bind cognition, whatever that means. And he was painting, not just collecting. He was painting people. I think he was trying to trap them in the canvases. Real people. "Look, just call me. Don't touch the paintings." He didn't call back after that. The next morning, I went back. I told myself I just needed to check one last thing, grab a few more photos, and I'd be done. But deep down, I think I already knew. I wasn't going back for the appraisal. I was going back for answers. The storm had come during the night, and the property was slick with mud and fallen leaves. As I stepped through the front door, the whole house felt different. Not just cold, but pressurized like I'd stepped into a vacuum. I moved room to room. In the library, the logs in the fireplace had fallen inward, scattered ash across the carpet. Something was sticking out from the debris. I pulled it free. It was a journal. The leather was cracked, pages damp from soot and mildew. Inside, the entries were frantic, handwritten notes, diagrams, and sketches that made my stomach turn. The eyes are watching when the mind is still. The canvas is the trap. The trap must be looked at. I tried with Amelia. She resisted. It took days. The brush is not the weapon. The gaze is. They move when you sleep. One page had a sketch of a man with no eyes. Another showed the same face from the portraits, but the eyes had been cut out and taped onto a different page entirely. I knew I had to go into the sealed wing. It was stupid, dangerous, but I'd come too far. I pried the boards off the door with a crowbar I found in the basement. They gave way with a moan of old nails, the wood splintering like dry bones. Dust poured out into the hall. The corridor beyond was pitch black. I clicked on my flashlight. The hallway stretched only about 15 feet before ending in a door. Along the walls, every square inch was covered in paintings. Hundreds of them, unframed, many unfinished, some clearly damaged by moisture or fire. But all of them featured faces, screaming, twisted, staring. Not a single one smiled. The door at the end was steel, a vault door. I didn't know houses could even have something like that. My flashlight flickered. I reached for the handle. It opened on its own. The room inside was not part of the original house. It had cinder block walls, a concrete floor, and an industrial-looking light that flickered overhead. The air smelled of turpentine, mold, and old blood. At the center of the room was an easel. A painting sat on it, covered by a cloth. Around it, candles, all melted to waxy nubs. I stepped closer. Something in my chest said no, screamed it, but my hand moved anyway. I pulled the cloth away. The painting was of a woman. Not Langford's wife. Not a stranger. Me. I was painted in terrifying detail. Every freckle, every strand of hair, every wrinkle in my clothes. But the expression was blank. Eyes empty, like a mannequin made of flesh. Then I noticed a corner. Langford's signature was there, yes. But below it, scratched in jagged strokes, was a second line of text. She's almost ready. I backed away. The door slammed shut behind me. I hit the door so hard I nearly broke my shoulder. The steel didn't budge. The room was sealed behind me, airtight and windowless. My flashlight began to flicker again, that sickly white light pulsing like a dying heartbeat. The air was thick, foul with the stench of rot and linseed oil. The painting of me still sat on the easel, watching. That was the only word I could think of, watching. Because the longer I stared into my painted eyes, the more it felt like something behind them was staring back. I don't remember deciding to tear it down. I just remember the scream that came out of my throat as I ripped the canvas from the frame and hurled it against the wall. It hit with a sound that was wrong. Not a soft thud, but something like wet meat slapping tile. There was something inside the frame. I had to know. I took out my phone and used its flashlight. I pulled back the torn canvas to look behind the painting, fully expecting to see a wooden backing or maybe even some sort of tracking device. Instead, I saw a layer of skin. Not paint. Skin. Veined and translucent, stretched taut like it had been glued to the frame. Beneath it, eyes were embedded in the surface, human-looking, twitching and darting as though reacting to light. Dozens of them, bloodshot, blinking independently. One of them locked onto me. I stumbled back, ball rising in my throat. Suddenly, I understood Langford's obsession. He wasn't just painting people, he was binding them, imprisoning something alive inside his work. Something sentient. And those canvases? They weren't just depictions. They were containers. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have because the next thing I recall is waking up to the sound of scratching. Soft at first, like a dry leaf brushing concrete. Then louder, more frantic, claws on stone. It was coming from the walls. All of them. I sat up and shone my light around the room. Nothing moved. The sound continued. Then I saw it. A handprint. In soot. slowly appearing on the wall beside the vault door. Then another, then a footprint upside down. On the ceiling, my breath caught. The paintings on the walls began to twitch. One of them, a portrait of a child with hollow eyes, split along the mouth. Not like paper tearing, like a wound opening. A tongue slithered out. I lost it, screamed, kicked the door with everything I had, punched it until my knuckles were raw. I think I passed out again, or dissociated. All I know is I woke up hours later, sitting against the wall, door wide open, the house completely silent, like nothing had happened. When I stepped back into the hall, I knew instantly that something was wrong. The paintings that had lined the hallway, gone. Not fallen, gone. The hallway was bare. Dust marked the outlines where the frames had once hung, but the frames themselves were missing. I checked the other rooms. More paintings had vanished. The one of the man in the kitchen, gone. The portrait of the woman with her mouth stitched closed, gone. The air was colder, heavier, almost electric. I looked down the hallway and saw something I'll never forget. Wet footprints, bare, human, leading from a sealed room down the stairs. As if something had just walked out. And not just something, someone. When I got in my car, I saw I had one missed call. Another voicemail. It was Jared. He sounded different, calmer, but wrong. Heather, I need to correct what I said before. You should keep going. Finish the appraisal. It's important to document everything. Don't worry about the faces. They only look at you if you look too long. Just be still. If something's watching you, be still. You'll be okay. Probably. Good luck. There was silence for a long time. I almost hung up. Then he whispered, "They already know your name." I threw my phone across the car. That night, back at my motel, I couldn't sleep. The TV was off, the blinds drawn, and yet the entire room felt like it was subtly shifting around me, like the walls were breathing. I turned to research instead. I found a scanned article from 1979, reclusive painter Langford linked to disappearances. It had never gone to press, apparently squashed by the Langford family's lawyers, but a copy remained in the local archives. According to the article, 6 women, all locals, had gone missing between 1968 and 1977. All had either modeled for Langford or worked in his estate. Police could never prove anything, but one line chilled me to the bone. Several friends of the missing noted that the last time they saw their loved ones, they had spoken of feeling watched inside Langford's home, especially by the paintings. There was more. One of the missing women had been dating a photographer who tried to blow the whistle. He claimed to have evidence, a photograph he took inside Langford's studio. It showed a painting of his girlfriend that he insisted she had never posed for. He was killed in a hit-and-run a week later. The photograph was never found. I should have left, packed my things, never looked back. But the truth is, I couldn't stop thinking about that painting of me. How accurate it had been. The way it had appeared before I ever stepped foot in the studio. Something had been watching me longer than I realized, and I needed to know if it could be stopped. I returned to the Langford house one last time, but this time I brought something with me, a mirror. Inside the studio, the painting of me was gone. The room was cold, so cold I could see my breath. I placed the mirror on the easel where the painting had been and waited. The room stayed silent for what felt like an hour. Then the walls began to move. Not physically, optically, like the paint was shifting behind the surface. Something crawling beneath the concrete. Then, in the mirror's reflection, I saw her, standing behind me. The version of me from the painting. Eyes vacant, skin tight, expression blank. But she was breathing, and her hand slowly reached toward the back of my neck. I turned. No one there. When I looked back at the mirror, she was smiling. I ran from that studio, back through the hallway with its vanished paintings, down the stairs that still echoed with phantom footsteps. And as I fled out the front door and into the gray dusk, something trailed behind me, not in sound, but in feeling. A cold tug, like the brush of unseen fingers against the back of my shirt. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. But even there, in the quiet cabin, keys trembling in my hand, I couldn't shake the sensation that I'd brought something back out with me. Not a ghost, not a person, something older, hungrier. I returned to the motel, didn't shower, didn't eat, just locked the door, bolted the windows, and turned every single light on. But it didn't help. At around 2 a.m., I saw the first one, a small, rectangular frame, propped up against the chair near the bed. I hadn't brought any paintings with me. I never touched the ones in the house. But this one was there. Inside the frame was my motel room. The same bed, same desk, same hideous wallpaper. Only in the painting, I was sleeping, and there was a shape standing beside the bed. Featureless, just a silhouette, watching. I tore the painting apart with my bare hands. Splinters in my palms, canvas in my teeth. Threw the remains out into the parking lot. Went back inside. The painting was back on the chair, exactly where it had been, intact. Sleep was no longer an option. I turned the overhead light off, something I hadn't done in days. The sudden darkness made my skin crawl, but I needed to check something. I stood on the bed and unscrewed the dusty bulb, slowly, carefully, until it dropped into my hand. It was heavier than it should have been. I held it up to the window and turned it over in the dim light. Inside the bulb, I swear to you, was an eye. Not painted, real, floating, alive, blinking at me through glass. I dropped it. It didn't shatter. It hit the floor and rolled. And just before it stopped, it turned to look at me. I drove 4 hours through the night to find Jared. I needed answers. I needed to know what I was up against, what Langford had done, what I'd stepped into. I found him in a roach-infested apartment in some forgotten corner of Chicago. He looked worse than before. Pale, thin, hair shaved off. Every mirror in the apartment smashed. Windows blacked out with garbage bags. He let me in without a word. The place stank of ammonia and blood. When I showed him a photo of the painting from the motel room, he didn't blink. "They've chosen you," he said, voice hollow. "They always pick one to carry it forward. The art doesn't die with the artist. It just migrates. Like spores." "Spores?" I asked. He nodded toward the walls, which were bare but scratched up deeply, as if he'd clawed at them for weeks. "It's not paintings anymore. Not just. It's images, reflections, places. You'll see them watching from puddles, from the shine on your phone screen. It spreads." He held out his arm. Carved into the skin with a blade or a wire or God knows what was a single word: "Look." I left his apartment before sunrise. Drove for hours with no music. No sound but the wheels on pavement. When I got home, I found a new package at my door. No return address. Inside was a frame. No canvas. Just a simple blackwood frame with a small brass plate at the bottom. It read, "Portrait of Heather unfinished." I didn't put it on the wall. I didn't even touch it after that. But the next morning, it was hanging above my bed. Empty, except at night. At night, when I lay in the dark and pretended not to look, I'd see it begin to fill in. A face. Mine, slowly emerging. But not mine as I was now. Mine as I would be, eyes wide, mouth open, screaming. A week passed. I stopped going to work. People texted, called. I didn't answer. I was too busy documenting everything. The mirror in the bathroom that fogged up in a perfect oval, but only at night. The hallway light that flickered only when I passed beneath it. And then the phone started moving. I'd wake up to find the camera app open. Gallery full of photos I didn't take. Photos of me, sleeping. Photos from inside the closet. Photos from outside the house. But worst of all, short clips. 10 seconds. 15. Shot at strange angles. Showing parts of the house I never entered. In one of them, a voice whispered, "She knows now." We're inside. I finally cracked. Went to the ER. Told them everything. Not the supernatural parts, but enough to land me in psych observation for 3 days. On the second night, I found a drawing under my pillow. Charcoal on thick paper. It showed me, strapped to a bed in a hospital gown, tubes in my arm, eyes wide with terror, and someone standing behind me, fingers stretched wide, brushing my hair with black paint. The caption below read, "Her final stroke." I was released from the hospital after 3 days. They gave me a bottle of lorazepam, pamphlets about sleep hygiene, and a counselor's number I knew I wouldn't call. I didn't tell them about the portrait of me painting myself, about the charcoal smudges on my hands when I hadn't touched a pencil, about the voice in the walls of my room whispering in a tone too hoarse to be human. We only become real when you see us. I should have left town, burned everything and gone off-grid. But the moment I stepped back into my apartment, I knew that wasn't an option anymore. There were new paintings on my walls. Not brought in, not delivered. They'd simply appeared. One was of me, slumped in a hospital chair, wide-eyed, for still an arm. Another was my hallway, but in shadows. Something crawling across the ceiling, long-limbed, thin as thread. The last one was a close-up of a brush dipped in flesh. I tried destroying them. Again, hammer, lighter fluid, paint thinner. I wore gloves, a respirator. Played loud music to drown out the sound I knew would come. The burning canvas screamed, not out loud, but inside, deep behind my eyes, like something clawing down the inside of my skull. When the fire died, I was lying on the floor, bleeding from my ears and nose. No flame touched me, but my skin was scalded. And the paintings? Whole again, smiling. Every time I turned a corner, I'd catch him. The same man. Sometimes in the hallway mirror. Sometimes in the reflection of the black screen of my TV. Once I saw his fingers curling out from the toilet bowl. He wore a paint-stained smock. Fingers black to the knuckle. No eyes. Just deep holes, weeping ink. He never moved when I looked at him. But I began hearing footsteps in the walls at night, and paint dripping from under the baseboards. Thick, black streaks, reeking of turpentine and something rotting. I had an old photo of my sister Heather on my fridge. It had been there for years. She died in a car accident when I was 21. But now her eyes move, not in a trick of the light way. Not subtle. They follow me. Every time I enter the kitchen, she's looking somewhere new. Watching. Not smiling anymore. Just waiting. And one night, I swear, she blinked. I stopped sleeping. Every wall was a painting now. Layers on layers, as if the house itself was being turned inside out. Like it wasn't just haunted, but repainted into something else. And then one night, my bedroom doorway vanished. Literally gone. Where the door should be, there was only canvas, stretched and wet, still drying. I touched it. It gave way, and behind it, not wood, not drywall, was a corridor. Dark, wet, lined with frames. I stepped through. It wasn't a house anymore. It was a museum, but not like any gallery you've ever seen. No lighting, no people, just rows of paintings on flesh-like walls. Each painting was of someone I'd known. Old friends, teachers, strangers I passed on the street, all screaming, all mid-expression, some faces stretched in agony, others calm, but wrong, as if they knew something I didn't. One canvas still dripped, fresh, and in that one I saw myself, standing in that very corridor, looking at the painting, and behind me, in the painted reflection, was the man, paintbrush raised. This isn't just about art. Langford didn't create haunted paintings. He found them, or they found him. They're not ghosts, not spirits. They're parasites, conceptual entities, ideas that feed on perception. The more you look, the more real they become. The more attention you give them, the more space they take. Until one day, the painting doesn't need a wall anymore. It just is. I returned from the corridor, or thought I did. But my apartment felt thinner. The air had changed. Time moved differently. Clocks ticked unevenly. Water refused to boil. There was a new frame in the kitchen. Black. Empty. But every night, it fills in a little more. And I know what it's painting. My disappearance. My replacement. When I woke up on the floor of my apartment, the light through the windows wasn't daylight. It had that soft, flickering hue of old fluorescent bulbs, the kind that buzz. But I hadn't installed any. There was no furniture, no sound of traffic outside, no hum of the fridge. Just a faint, static-like hiss that seemed to emanate from the paintings that now lined every inch of the walls. Except they weren't paintings anymore. They were windows. Some showed places I didn't recognize. Forests at night, empty classrooms, hospital rooms with flickering lights. Others displayed memories, intimate ones, my childhood bedroom, the inside of my parents' car on the last road trip we took before they divorced. And then there were other windows. Black ones. Still. Waiting. I stopped in front of one of the darker windows. A small brass plaque beneath it read, Frame 46, the first exit. It showed a hallway with no visible doors. Walls lined with frames that pulsed slightly, like gills. My reflection wasn't in it. Instead, I saw a child standing alone in the center of the corridor, his back to me, shoulders trembling, and a man at the end of the hallway, paint-stained hands, tall, smeared features like brush strokes that hadn't fully dried. He pointed at me. No, behind me. I turned. There was no one there. When I looked back at the frame, the child was now closer to the glass, his mouth moving. I stepped back as the glass fogged slightly. Not like it was cold, but like breath had fogged it from the other side. And then I heard it clear as anything I'd ever heard in my life. Daniel. My name, whispered by two voices in unison. One soft, the other jagged and scraping. We've almost painted you. I ran, tried to punch through the walls. Nothing gave. Not wood, not plaster, not even the frames. I tried covering them with cloth, but it slipped off. The paintings absorbed it. Every direction I turned, more corridors unfolded. I realized something then. I was inside the house. But the house was inside the painting, and the painting was becoming me. I found the bathroom again, or what used to be it. The mirror above the sink was now a stretched canvas. I avoided looking too long, but a sound caught me. Blink. like a drop of water hitting a tin sink. I looked up. The mirror was now my face. My eyes, except they blinked out of sync with my own. And then, slowly, they looked left, independent of me. I followed their gaze. A new frame had appeared behind me. Tall, thin. It was slowly opening. Not like a painting, like a door. I can't describe what stepped out. It wore the shape of a man, but it wasn't painted with hands. It looked as if it had been sketched in panic, mid-scream, and left unfinished. Shadows bled from its fingers, and its mouth was too wide. It didn't walk. It floated just above the ground. As it moved toward me, its feet brushed the floor softly, leaving trails of wet black behind. I backed away slowly. It mimicked me, but a second behind, like it was syncing with me, matching me, learning. I don't know if I screamed or cried. Maybe both. But I collapsed against the wall near the kitchen. And that's when I saw it. One of the frames now showed Heather, my sister. She wasn't painted. She was alive, inside the frame, banging on the glass, screaming something. I put my hands against it. She reached toward me. Don't let it finish the painting. Her voice came through like a muffled radio signal. Behind her, that same tall, brush-marked figure loomed. It dipped a brush into a black pool and turned toward a blank canvas. She turned too late. It began painting her. Her screams silenced as her body went rigid. Skin cracking, bleeding colors. Her face stretched into stillness. And she became part of the wall. I woke up in my own bed. Again, I didn't remember falling asleep. It was morning. Sunlight, clean and golden, spilled through the window. All the paintings were gone. No shadows. No whispers. No reflections that didn't match. I thought I had escaped, until I saw it, in the hallway. One final canvas, unframed, still wet. It was me, lying in the bed, eyes wide, mouth open in a scream, skin peeling away in brush strokes. It was unfinished. The background was missing. The figure holding the brush hadn't been filled in yet. But the hand painting me was my own. It took me longer than I want to admit to stand. The image me, painted in terror, frozen on the canvas, still hung on the wall. Only now it had changed. My painted eyes were closed. My hands were folded over my chest, as if I were a corpse. I stood there for almost 15 minutes, unable to look away. I was afraid that if I blinked, my painted self wouldn't. And then, without warning, the air in the room changed. It wasn't a temperature shift. It was deeper than that, like something essential about the air had been erased. It tasted hollow. Sound felt thinner. The world no longer had the texture of the Real. A low, distant sound began behind the walls, like a brush dragged slowly across a taut canvas. Over and over. Sick, sick. Every time the sound came, my skin crawled, not from fear, but from familiarity. I'd heard it before, in dreams, in nightmares I'd had as a child, where faceless people stood at the foot of my bed, watching me sleep, and somewhere in the dark, something was painting. Now I knew what. Now I knew who. At precisely 1:13 a.m., the hallway light flickered. Not off on. I hadn't turned it on. I crept forward, slowly, carefully, like I was approaching something sacred or profane. Each step felt louder than it should have. The hallway wasn't normal. It had more doors than it did yesterday. Each one had a brass plaque. Each plaque had a name. Heather, Mom, Dad. Some I recognized. Some I didn't. The last door at the end of the hall bore my full name. But something was wrong. It was written in what looked like dried red paint, but the paint was thick, too thick. It clung to the edges like clotting blood. I stepped closer. The door opened by itself. Inside was a single room, white walls, sterile, empty, except for a painting, covered by a white sheet. And standing in front of it, paint-stained and silent, was the artist. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But I knew. I knew he was aware of me. He didn't look quite human. Not anymore. His skin wasn't skin. It was canvas stretched tight over muscle and bone. His eyes had no whites, just swirls of color like oil slicks and puddles. His fingers were long and rigid, as if made from brushes themselves. He held a palette, but it was empty. No paints. Only one knife. He finally looked at me. His mouth didn't move, but his voice came like bristles dragged through blood. The final stroke must be willing. I tried to speak. I couldn't. You've been the canvas, the observer, the memory. Now, choose. Paint or be painted. I stared at the covered painting behind him. I don't know why, but I knew. It was mine. It had been waiting. Everything had been building to this room, this night, this moment. What happens if I paint? I whispered. You become me, the artist replied. And if I don't? He smiled, not with lips, but with the world. The walls darkened. The floor grew soft beneath my feet like a primed canvas. Then you stay, as all the others do, framed, forgotten, staring forever. I stepped forward. He offered me the knife, and I saw them, the paints. They were inside me. I saw my childhood, my sister's scream, the first time I saw the painting move. All colors, all pain, all memory, and I understood. He paints with lives. I took the knife, not to attack him, to paint. He stepped aside. The covered painting loomed. I pulled the sheet off, and there I was. My body, my eyes, my soul, but not finished. One side of the face was blank, waiting for the last stroke. I dipped the knife into my palm, let the blood well up. I dragged it across the canvas. The eye opened, in the painting, and behind me the artist gasped. He had no power left, because I had finished the painting, not him. And with that, he collapsed. The frames around the room flickered. I heard them scream, literally scream. All the trapped souls, the frozen faces in every room, wailing in agony as the gallery unraveled. And then silence. The white room cracked, like glass. I woke up 3 days later. So I was told, in my own bed. Paramedics had found me dehydrated, catatonic, clutching a paintbrush covered in dry blood. No signs of forced entry. No paintings. Not one. They were all gone. But they weren't. I knew at the moment I went back to my email. My inbox was empty, but there was one folder hidden in the metadata. Unfinished. Inside were hundreds of JPGs. Each one a painting. Each one of someone I'd known. Friends. Old teachers. Strangers I passed on the street once. And one, just one, that was labeled. I opened it. It was me, looking at the camera, smiling. But in the reflection of the glass was someone else, painted, watching. I don't know what I am anymore. I still see things, faces in mirrors that don't match mine. Paint streaks in my footprints, smudges on windows where no one's touched them. The artist is gone, but his work lives. Through me? Through others? Maybe the act of observing the painting finishes it. Maybe every pair of eyes adds a stroke. All I know is that sometimes, late at night, I'll look at a blank wall, and for a split second, I'll see canvas texture, and I'll hear it again. SHHHHHHKKK. The brush. Moving. Somewhere, just behind the wall.